going on, man? All right, good morning. All right, I have one person that understands a preparatory command and all that. I'll say good morning again. Good morning. All right. Hey, welcome over here to the Georgia Cyber Center today for our first session that's over here. I am Mike Black, Colonel retired United States Air Force, but I can speak HUA. My dad was Signal Corps, and I've had several joint assignments in a previous life. We have some back-to-back sessions this morning here featuring representatives from Army Capability Managers and the Cyber Center of Excellence. We're going to start the conversation this morning around cyberspace and electro warfare operations for the Army in 2030 with the ACMs that are here. This session will be followed by a unified network in support of dispersed command posts, featuring reps from the ACMs for tactical radios and network services. So now it's my pleasure to introduce this opening session and the speakers. We have Colonel Gary Brock, Army Capabilities Manager for EW, Electronic Warfare, and Colonel Nadine Nally, Army Capabilities Manager for Cyber. As for the ACM EW, Colonel Brock develops electromagnetic spectrum operations requirements, including both EW warfare or EW and spectrum management operations capabilities. And in her role as the ACM for Cyber, Colonel Nally advocates for solutions that enable defensive and offensive cyber operations, cyberspace situational understanding, and the delivery of persistent training environment capabilities. Their full bios can be found in the app or the conference website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Brock and Colonel Nally.
Thank you. Good morning. So first off, if the ACM for uniforms is in the room, air conditioner, please. So that being said, a couple of things that General Morrison and the senior leaders highlighted this morning I wanted to echo because it's going to tee up some of the way that we're driving the EW portfolio. For one is the software disaggregated from the hardware, aka the software is not married to the hardware and not separatable. The second thing is the SBE environment. When we look at that division fight and below, the really tactical edge, we've got to get away from the high-end encryption and get to where we can work with our partners, allies, and most importantly, at the tactical edge, fighting into the A2AD bubble, our joint partners. The third thing is integrated versus interoperable, meaning as we look at the EW portfolio, there are many industry partners in the space. So how do we come in as integrated solutions? As we give you an example, when we look at EWPMT, right now I want to add something to it. It's a pretty rough start to do a hard programming. When we modernize that, which we're going to do, it will have a core CORE app. Every function will be an additional app. All we have to worry about is the API integration. So when we get there, that's the idea of the entire portfolio, and you'll see how I kind of lay that out as we move forward. And like I said, our partners and allies. So what's changed since we were here a year ago? When we were here a year ago, we didn't have the 3.0 published, which gave us multi-domain operations. I was a month in the seat and quite frankly laying out a portfolio I didn't completely understand. And here we are a year later and we've had a lot of technological leaps. We've moved down Moore's Law and a lot of our industry partners out there with your companies have done a lot of innovation in this space. Also, our sister services have done a lot of innovation. The Navy and the Air Force specifically never let off the gas with the EW during the last 20 years when the Army really underinvested in the space. So we're looking to our partners for a lot of benchmarking as we look at those capabilities that are mature that we can quickly import over into an Army utilization. We published the doctrinal depths of templates of frontages. So you're looking at a core area of approximately 90 kilometers by 85 kilometers. So that when we're talking about a core fight, that gives you a general idea. But then again, when we go to Indo-PACOM, you can pretty much put that in the shredder because now we're talking distances of nautical miles, not kilometers. And again, we look at the EW portfolio against three distinct layers. The high altitude, the aerial, and the terrestrial. And we understand physics. So when we get to the physics of what we're trying to do, you'll see that we're teasing that out and where we're going with the portfolio. So a couple of acknowledgments first. Industry is going to outpace our acquisition cycle all day, every day. We will continue to be tied up in bureaucracy while you're doing leaps and bounds on technology. We're just trying to bolt onto a vehicle. So how do we buy down that risk between the innovation in industry and what we actually need at the tactical edge? And how do we get away from these large, exquisite systems that we're just doing persistent 5-year increments on to monthly to semi-annually updates at the software level? So what are we looking for from our industry partners? So I'll start first off with what we don't want. So what we don't want is we don't want anything that slows down our data exchanges. What we've learned is we've started to re-engage LISCO, is a couple of key things that our enemies are going to teach us. One is we're outgunned. We're never going to create the mass of firepower that we're going to face when we're going on offense into a very mature defensive line. The second thing is we're outranged. We can't reach the ranges that our enemy can right now. So what's our one advantage we do have? We have speed. And anything that slows down that speed within the formation is a no-go within the EW portfolio. And so how do we create that speed? It's the machine-to-machine integration. It's the data layer fight, and it's that data availability at the residential classification at the edge where it is intertwined and integrated flatly with both the fires ecosystem and the air defense ecosystem and the maneuver ecosystem. And I'll pounce on that a few times. Also what we don't want. We don't want a single system that performs large exquisite functions on a single platform. What do I mean by that? If I have a capability we're providing to the commander that provides a protection asset, the commander's going to want to align that against what he needs to defend, a counterfire radar, a Patriot launcher, those things that cannot die. If I give the commander a fires asset, he's going to want to put that where it can support maneuver. Or if I give the commander a sensing asset, he or she are going to want to put that where they can best get immediate combat relevant information and get that into the ecosystem where we're generating offensive firepower. However, all three of those require different capabilities and different geographic positioning on the battlefield. If those are one system, it's not helping the command work through combat friction. So how do we simplify that equation? So again, Indo-PACOM distances and fights are going to require those longer ranges, and we're going to have to be quiet. So these interdependencies between systems to tip and queue, these large-scale data transmissions required to make something do something for something else. We've got to get away from that. So what are we kind of looking for? Right now we're looking for machine learning. So when we look at the ES based on the new policy that we have written, when we look at ES within the combat sphere, I'm really looking at core and below. That ES has to be immediate, available, and at the data layer tied to decisions and fires and effects going down range. So how do we optimize that? It's classifier algorithms. Physics is physics. A radar cannot be anything else but a radar. So there's no need in getting tied around the axle of binary decisions. If we can get to a good enough with some fidelity in a fast evolving fight where someone is in the thick of it slinging lead, that's about all that commander needs, good enough. So how do we get to that with ES level data at the resident classification? That's the classifiers we're really looking for within our EW portfolio. Techniques, EA techniques. We're looking for innovative EA techniques that generate effects in support of a commander. So we're looking for EW techniques or payloads interchangeably to disrupt, deny, degrade, and generate those effects. If you look at our portfolio when we talked about the high altitude, it's nav warp. When we get to that aerial layer, it's disrupt, degrade, deny. Or how do we amplify effects or even give terminal assurance to some of our higher end lethal rounds? And when we get to the terrestrial layer, how do we disrupt enemy decision cycles within the edge of the battle? And finally, getting into what are we looking for as well, it's those smaller attributable hardware which are software innovative. So what do I mean by that? An SDR plus an antenna gives us what? A lot of capability we can mix and match. So when we look at the MEMS, you can go to the next slide. When we look at the MEMS portfolio, which you guys have seen this slide before, this is nothing new. Don't spend a lot of time staring at it. But when you look at the MEMS portfolio and what we're trying to get after with tactical deception, there's many ways we can do that. We can put a NAVWAR or a counter PNT, small form factor EA on SDR, and we can lob that through a fast cam as a minefield. We can drop that out of an aircraft where an enemy's going to pass through, or we can set it on a stake as we maneuver out of an area anticipating we have a follow-on force that's coming after us. And we can disrupt timing within the enemy. We look at other things of disrupting comms, disrupting radar. There's a lot of work going on in this space on those techniques. And finally, the last piece is how do we disaggregate the EA from the platforms? So we are going all in from the EW portfolio to a launched effect and a UAS-based payload. We're not going to look for those long, high-energy standing rounds that generate energy downrange, trying to overcome physics within the terrestrial layer. We're looking at how we get some coherency as we look at getting those things at altitude, creating those, what we tie these to is the meshed, integrated, collaborative, autonomous, swarming type formations. So overall, that's what I'll tease up. Looking forward to the discussion and the questions, because I know that you guys have been thinking a lot about this since our last talk, and that there's a lot of industry innovation out there. So with that, Nadine.
Good morning. So thanks, Gary. He's certainly talked about how we're going to push towards supporting and getting after and enabling the Army of 2030. I'm going to spend a little time to talk about the current efforts and how the ACM Cyber has worked with industry, the academia to support the efforts. Our strategy is nested with Army Futures Command as well as the Big Army to ensure that we are developing capabilities relevant to requirements provided by future warfighters on battlefield and in cyberspace. Our vision is to enable, in order to enable our vision, we recognize that we must address the challenges of the Army of 2030, those operational imperatives that are critical to our ability to succeed in warfighting at echelons. So that's whether we're looking to support one of the 3 theaters all the way down to one of the 25 BCTs. And those operational imperatives consist of the ability to sense farther, the ability to cover forces, precise and long-range fires, to protect the forces, communicate and share data, and or sustain the fight. So when you hear those 6 operational imperatives, every aspect of this will involve an element of cyber. And it begs the question, how are we enabling? As the landscape of the warfare changes to include threat of cyber attacks, the Army has prioritized developing cyber capabilities in a cohesive way to reduce cost and redundancy while maintaining the operational advantage. Whether it's in space of driven technologies, maximizing strategic partnerships, or minimizing stovepipe solutions. How does a particular industry solution help solve this problem? Now that's the question. Our cyberspace portfolio is a set of mutually supporting capabilities that enable us to rapidly sense, to understand, to decide, and to act in cyberspace. We currently manage over 32 programs of records within ACM Cyber. I'm going to move from left to right here on the slide. So starting with defensive cyber operations, defensive DCO is our most robust portfolio. Although we have 9 programs of record within this portfolio, our primary lines of effort are DCO tools, maneuver capabilities, and cyber analytics. The biggest takeaway here is that DCO is employed throughout friendly cyberspace, protecting data, networks, net-centric capabilities, and other designated systems during the full range of military and business operations. It's essentially allowing for continuous testing and monitoring and assessments of software tools to be used on the network. Next, our maneuver capabilities provide remote access, reducing time for DCO forces to respond to threat activities. So just to give you guys an example, because one of our priorities is, having that continuous engagement with the end user. During my time, I was a national cyber protection team lead. This was during the time of 2018 when General Nakasoni's priority of effort was the defense of the midterm elections and the ramp up to the 2020 elections. And that effort consisted of the prevention of interference and influence of our electoral system. So with that, he engaged in persistent engagement. And this is where we went out to some of our partner countries. Particularly as a national CPT lead, we went out to a partner country and we hooked our deployable defensive cyber operations system kits to the system to look for malicious activity on their network and essentially help them clean up those networks. What we found was the systems weren't actually meeting the needs of, or the requirements that we had originally forecasted for. So we called back to Cybercom, to our respective units, and explained exactly what we need. And in a fast fashion, through the agility of the program, we were able to get a capability drop on our systems, our DDS systems, to support that respective mission. So when you think about persistent engagement and the mission that the teams are doing, whether it's at the strategic level or all the way out to the tactical edge, the ability to turn or pivot that capability to support mission requirements. So this was within the maneuver capabilities. And then our cyber's #1 priority, you'll see down at the bottom of the DCO aspect, is cyber analytics. And this is our ability to get analysis on the Army's big data platform, and that's known as Gabriel Nimbus. It's vital to the cyber domain, it's vital to the cyber mission, and it gives us the ability to rapidly process terabytes of data, increasing the ability to detect the adversary in a contested threat environment. The Army's way ahead here, and something that we're looking to evolve the cyber platform, is to push the lower echelon analytics platform known as LEAP forward to reduce the bandwidth requirements on the network. It's an effort where industry partners will be critical in operationalizing capabilities. And when you think of bringing strategic capabilities down to the tactical edge, putting that LEAP kind of at the tactical edge, that LEAP capability to push those analytics back will certainly support that effort. Next is OCO. ACOM Cyber's #1 priority right now is providing support to the 120-day study. The Secretary of the Army has directed through the Principal Cyber Advisor at the Army staff to conduct a study to look at how do we take the strategic joint cyber capabilities and bring them down, and what's going to be retained within the Army for the tactical force. And this was precipitated by U.S. Cybercom's enhanced budget control. So we're looking at opportunities here where, we're going to look at how do we take some of these existing OCO capabilities and provide them down to the tactical force. Obviously, there's first, second, and third order effects of that, comes authorities and funding and training, but we're looking at how we're going to be involved in that effort. And this is in regards to the National Defense Strategy Memo and supporting the pace and challenge and the modernization of programs, as you may heard from General Morrison this morning. Our OCO tools conceptually are built around counter adversary effects by focusing on the adversary's C4I systems, weapon systems, and their critical support infrastructure. The tools will be able to be customized remotely for the specific threat environment. And this leads to the last two columns, which is our virtual environments. The first one is our persistent cyber training environment, which is one of our portfolio aspects of training. And it provides us the ability to have a common operating picture of key terrain for the cyber training environment. So it's a training environment that gives us the ability to conduct individual training all the way to collective training, and the priority of effort for not just the joint force, but for the Army is have an environment that is responsive to the customer's need, creating content that's relevant, capacity where you're able to provide repeatability within that environment, accuracy where you're able to emulate the operational environment, availability to the user, and survivability, where that network's able to withstand the information that's being input into it. It supports a user through the training of the life cycle, from individual, again, to collective training, all the way to mission rehearsal, being able to replicate what's going to happen on the objective in cyberspace. And then to the last column here is our cyberspace situational understanding. And this is a common operating picture which can be compared to the CPOF environment that you're likely all familiar with. It allows the cyber warfighter to see themselves and the adversary on the battlefield to deliver desired effects. And as the cyber portfolio has evolved, we've recognized that there's opportunities here to transition cyber SU to additional portfolios where we can look at aspects of harvesting, aspects of cyber SU, whether it's the assess and analyze aspect of that, and getting it into a common operating picture to support the tactical force. So that's kind of a way ahead for cyber SU. When we look at our priorities, I mentioned earlier our work and our effort that we're doing for the 120-day study. We're constantly working to make sure that we're staying compliant with our IT boxes, to get them renewed. It creates a space that allows us to be agile with providing the requirements and capabilities to the end users. And the last one here is to deliver prioritized capability requirements. And again, that's a process where we need to have continuous communication, whether it's with the program manager, whether it's with industry, learning about new capabilities that's out there, so we can have that conversation and that dialogue with our program manager. But we're looking to continuously have that communication with all stakeholders. And initiatives here, you can see, I've mentioned these as we've gone through the speech, but if you have questions, we'll talk about them in our Q&A. So we want to save time to have Q&A with the group. So with that, we'll open it up to the crowd.
Go ahead. Just a quick note before everyone starts. Sorry, this is your friendly AV guy. The microphones in the room, as a quick little note, you have to press them a little bit harder than you would think to get them to turn green, but when they're green, they are live. If you're not hearing yourself clearly in the room, you also have to get a lot closer than you think. So if worse comes to worse, we'll have some people run some microphones out, but that's most likely why you won't hear yourself. You'll have to get very close to them.
This question is for Colonel Nally. Just wondering, where are you in the study process? Beginning, halfway, the end, where are you?
I believe the question was, where are we with the 120-day study process? So while we're not running the 120-day study, it has been delegated down to the Cyber Center of Excellence. We are participating heavily in the 120-day study, supplying or supporting the mission analysis that's been done against the offensive cyber and the defensive cyber operations aspects of that. We are day 59 into the 120-day study. Correct? Yeah.
I'm getting the nod to chime in. So the study is being run by Peter While from the Cyber School. He's a promenade. It encompasses cyberspace, specifically cyber, electromagnetic warfare, and information advantage. They're about halfway through the study. He's done a significant road trip to get information from tactical commanders, and we're also sending an analytical team out to to gather some additional data. Initial analysis is ongoing, and my understanding is they will staff the results with general officers that are stakeholders. There will not be a formal staffing process.
I will caveat that the 58 days precedes my time in this seat. I've only been in the seat for 6 weeks, so.
I have a question concerning dispersion of command posts. So the Army Futures Command concept for command and control was approved in July 2021. I'm from Mission Command, seated Chet Wilson, I'm sorry. I'm the concepts requirements deputy. Anyway, so as our focus is on the survivability and of the command post. And so part of the concept required capability in that is dispersion of command posts. Now, I know there's a section or a session that's going to come later, but I want to know from your perspective, both from EW and Cyber, how you envision what you look forward into the future to develop, that command post dispersion, one, complicates what you're going to try to do to protect and enable the commander of the command post functions. So how does that complicate it for you? And then what are you looking at as possible solutions that you either have in the near-term horizon, say 2030 versus 2040?
So I'll just take the first go at that. So first off, I would say it actually doesn't complicate our portfolio, it complements it. Because I think when we look at the EW fight, we're looking at disaggregating that to the maneuver formation as it is. We want to get as many of our tools MOS agnostic as possible. So when you look at the 17 series, and again, intentionally built 17, just like 14 air defense, 13 fires, 11 maneuver. So when we get into that family of the maneuver, fires, and effects community, what is it that we're looking for within the command post as it distributes, and what do they need to make decisions and survive? So as we disaggregate our portfolio from these big, isolated, compute store heavy platforms to disaggregated, smaller apps, you would build those apps in your formation to the compute store you have available and to the capabilities you have. So when you put those APIs on there, part of your set the theater or RSOI in the theater would be to set your EWPMT for the EW portfolio you have. How many instances of those do you need? And where are your EMS sensors that are going to give you that see yourself within the EMS and your country load? So the country load would be what is the national picture like that we understand is persistent, so we can quickly deviate gray space from red space to blue space. And we can focus on blue if we want to make MCON decisions within that footprint and present the commander those options on an EMS decision matrix. So here's what you would lose if you cut this down, but here's what makes you seen, here's what makes you targetable within the EMS. So as we look at where we're going in the portfolio, I think we're actually very complementary. It's how do we make sure we weave those in through a full .mil PFP integration. I think we have some work to do there.
And from the cyber perspective, as I mentioned with Cyber SU, a lot of work went into how this could complement other efforts. And we've worked with the Unified Network Operations team and ACMs and our program managers across the board to synchronize the requirements. And we've identified the current and emerging capabilities that will be better suited to support the command force and support the Army unified effort. So we're early in that process, but the decision has been made from a cyber situational understanding perspective. We're harvesting aspects of that capability, the analyze and assess. I'm looking at my branch chief over here. The assess and analyze aspect of that, and we're pushing it up to address full integration into the capability so it can better support and complement future efforts for command post operations.
Hi, Mark Pomerleau with Defense Scoop. Colonel Nally, recognizing that you're pretty new to the seat, you might not be able to answer this, but with Cybercom's enhanced budget authority and a lot of the JICWA components, I guess, kind of architected out, how do you see ACM Cyber's role shifting to support more kind of Army organic capabilities vice U.S. Cybercom?
So as the enhanced budget, the question was with the enhanced budget control coming out in this coming October, FY24, how will ACM Cyber continue to support that? So what I failed to mention right now was that with the persistent cyber training environment, though it is a joint program, ACM Cyber does manage that portfolio. So we recognize the need because when you deal with JICWA and aspects of JICWA, whether it's JCAP or other aspects in order to get the full holistic view of the capability, we're going to continue to manage that aspects of that from an ACM Cyber perspective, specifically with PCTE, elements of JCAP, there's going to be a natural transition over to the purple side, the joint force.
Yeah, do you see a shift, I guess, in terms of supporting more organic Army capabilities as opposed to U.S. Cybercom, especially as the Army is looking at kind of more tactically focused RF capabilities?
So specifically, I'll call out for organic capabilities within the JICWA architecture. When you deal with PCTE, right now there's aspects of PCTE that will go down to, for example, the Army Schoolhouse, and we're doing training at the Army level to support that. So we're doing a round out where they're able to conduct training at the schoolhouse at Fort Gordon in the Advanced Operators Course so they can kind of fill the capability prior to getting to their respective units. So it's not a first instance whether they're going to the division level or they're going over to support the cyber mission force. So joint versus organic. Yes.
Hi, good morning. This question is for Colonel Nally. Are there plans to expand PCTE's capabilities or capacity over the near or short term? And if so, are there any notable milestones we could potentially expect?
I can hear the question.
PCTE expansion and notable milestones that are upcoming.
Ma'am, we could take that question.
I didn't hear. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, there are plans to expand it now, and the PM is currently working that to give more capability, especially on the unclassed side of the house, the unclassed side of the house now. Some of the RCSs that currently do our remote compute store capabilities, those particular RCSs are being upgraded. So the capacity on those that they can currently do right now, they'll be able to do about 2.5 times here in the next couple of years on each of those RCSs. As we continue to grow and extend out to cyberspace workforce, PCT will also scale out in capacity and grow over the next 5 years.
Colonel DeRosier, DAMO SOC. This question's for Colonel Brock. Coming from a combatant command, we work together and very familiar with the offensive cyber piece. Where do you currently see the EW portfolio and the cyber portfolio overlapping? And where do you see it going in the future? Is there more overlapping, more integration between the two?
So great question, Mike. The question was looking at the combatant command level and the fight. So when we think of the large strategic to operational bridge, where do you see the cyber and the EW portfolio really overlapping or complementing? And the answer is I really see that within the reprogramming enterprise. So when we think about EW and reprogramming, so first off, you have a very large SIGINT bill on the front end of that to understand what it is we're seeing out there in the wild. So when we do our set the theater with these with systems that are probably not survivable, but do a very good job of SIGINT development that can get within, international airspace or international waters with no harm, no foul, then we want to leverage all that they can develop to pull back so that we understand what we're dealing with so that we can develop our techniques. When we come in to transition those techniques into an operational footprint, we need to get the resident classification where they can quickly be paired at the edge, custom tailored at the edge to deliver the effects we desire, which is the arsenal. So the arsenal is on board the systems and enables the operators to do that. So that is a pure EW function. So backing up from the EW to the reprogramming enterprise is really where I see that overlap between the two portfolios. Yes.
Good morning, CW4 Rivera, our Cyber G2. So can you discuss any initiatives that are planned or in progress to characterize, normalize, and tag the disparate data sets that are going into Gabriel Nimbus in support of DCO operations?
Data tagging of data sets going into Gabriel Nimbus.
That would be an R-Cyber question.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to defer that question to our cyber partners who actually own Gabriel Nimbus. But definitely bring that one down front, and we'll make sure we have the right person here to discuss that after we wrap up here. There was another question up here somewhere.
Yeah.
Withdrawn. Got it. Oh, yes.
Hey, sir. Sergeant Major Potter from 780th. So the question I wanted to ask is to dovetail on what you were just talking about. So are we addressing the policy changes to be able to do that in a denied environment forward to where we have our own 17 deltas on the objective forward to be able to adjust those waveforms on the fly versus the traditional process of sending it back and having the research analysis done, which would not work in a 2030 operating concept in a denied environment?
Sergeant Major, you could not have summarized the portfolio any better than you just stated. But I want to echo a few things you just said and kind of tie that together. So when we look at benchmarking our sister services, one of the ones I'm really spending a lot of time with right now is the Air Force 350th Electromagnetic Warfare Wing, and I may have misquoted that. But what they've done is they put their SIGINTers, their EW professionals, their platform developers, and the technique developers all under the same operational commander. So think about the power of that. You own the entire enterprise, which for the Army exists between secretariat levels under a single operational command. And when we go into contact, unlike the Air Force, we don't have that reach back. You fight as an isolated force within your bubble that you are put at the edge to do. And if you go out and radiate to send all that data back, you become the target. So how do we prevent that? It's exactly that. We put the green suitors in the reprogramming seat. We put the green suitors in the tailoring the techniques at the edge seat, and we put them with the EW capabilities, and we mission tailor those based on the performance that we're required to do within that commander's footprint. So absolutely, that is in the thought process.
Colonel Stephen Hamilton from Army Cyber Institute. At the beginning, Colonel Brock, you mentioned that you want to separate EA from ES, which I think makes a lot of sense in distributed ES sensing. However, right now, the TLS BCT is not configured to do that. So how do you intend to change it?
So how do we plan to disaggregate the EA from the ES? Was that the question?
Correct.
Yes. So the first step is defining what ES is and what do we really need. And it's getting that actually processing or classifier algorithms as close to those ES sensors as we can. So what gives us that good enough fidelity to get an EA pairing on a technique that we need to counter that signal of interest, whether that be a waveform of a radar, which our sister service has done a lot of work in, or comms, which are still kind of raw. So if we look at those two pieces, what do we need off that sensor, the classifier algorithm, and what's our arsenal of techniques look like? When we do that, we pair that with the payload, and then we get the disaggregation through either a launched effect, or we get that on a UAS under the wing, small UAS form factor, or we get that through some type of LPI signal to transmit that to where it needs to go at the lowest waveform where we blend in with the environment. So the disaggregation really comes in through the launched effects, the UAS payloads, and how we get off of the same system doing the sensing and shooting. All right, looks like we've hit.
Colonel Branch.
Yeah, so you talked about cyber situational understanding at the maneuver level. I know we struggled with that even at the strategic levels in the past. I'm curious what you think that will look like compared to what Colonel Brock just talked about from an EW perspective. And then how do you see, as you're new to the seat, really the breakdown of capability to build that versus acquire or purchase it from industry?
From a cyber situational understanding, the capability currently exists, and we've worked with our partners to develop that. So it does exist. Aspects of it has been, or is currently from the Mission Command Program Office, is being harvested. That goes back to the ability at the tactical edge to assess and analyze our blue forces. That's been harvested and incorporated into our information dimension IS-ICD requirements.
Last chance for any further questions? All right, Colonel Nally and Colonel Brock, I want to thank you for taking time this morning to share your insightful remarks. In lieu of a guest speaker gift, we are going to make a donation to the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society on your behalf. Our next session is scheduled to start at 11:15, so you can take a comfort break, and we will start right on cue at 11:15.
Yeah, no, thank you. Oh, okay. I just learned something.
Thank you.
You're a PSB.
I am. I was at the National Security Council.
Okay.
So I was with the defense director and I did cyber policy. Hello.
Walk around, find it makes it easier.
Nice to meet you as well.
All right, good morning. All ready to start our second session over here at the GCC. A presentation on unified network in support of dispersed command posts. This will be from Major Robert Williams, ACM Tactical Radios, and Jonathan Long, ACM Networks and Services. Quickly, Major Williams is the Operations Branch Chief and the Cyber Capability Development and Integration Director at ACM Tactical Radios, which serves as the Army's centralized coordinator for capability modernization and user activities associated with tactical radios. A lower-end tier tactical unified network operations, assured positioning, navigation, and timing, and tactical C4ISR electronic warfare convergence. Mr. Long is a branch chief for the network integration and operations at ACM Networks and Services, the Army's centralized capability manager for the Department of Defense Information Network and Army Network and Services at the DODIN A operations. Their bios are either on the app or on the web page. So without further ado, Major Williams and Mr. Long.
Good morning, everyone. So, and thank you for the introduction. So, what I hope to accomplish today is to lay on for you how ACM-TR, Army Capability Manager, Tactical Radios, is looking to deliver the Army of 2030 and modernize the Army of 2040, all framed within our support to unified network operations and unified network operations support of distributed command posts. With that being said, so I want to address roughly 3 to 4 points about how we gotten after the analysis, identified the critical needs of the maneuver commander and leaders, as well as talk about some of these solutions from a software perspective and a hardware perspective. And then I'll close out with our immediate term, near term, and long-term modernization strategy, and try to frame that in some of our Army senior leaders' keynote speaker comments this morning. So with that being said, if anyone is familiar, we take the approach of find, fix, finish, and assess. And by that I mean we find through national security strategy, Army operating concepts, and required capabilities, and we move from there on to solution analysis, needs analysis, and then try to close the gap. So what we have determined as we look to deliver the Army of 2030 and the signal support to 2030 is that the leaders, specifically maneuvers, fires effects type leaders, they have the critical need for assured voice, position, location, information, and access to digital fires. And as we look to close that gap and ensure that they have that capability in the time frame described, we look at helping them overcome some of the operational challenges. And some of those operational challenges are, which you've heard mentioned from our Army senior leaders in their keynote address, is large-scale combat operations. Past 20 years, we've done COIN, 20 plus years. Now we're transitioning the Army to multi-domain operations and large-scale combat operations. So that's a key challenge. And then framed within the context of this discussion and brief are highly mobile and dispersed CPs. So we have to figure out how to, again, deliver assured voice, position, location information, as well as digital fires to highly mobile and distributed CPs. We also have to take into account the threats. We have to help overcome the challenges of jamming, direction finding, as well as making sure that we can integrate with our mission partners in the future. As I transition to talk about the solutions, I want to look through the lens of line of sight beyond line of sight and those considerations. I think the key components to that we're looking for from a software perspective is global frequency availability, emissions characteristics, resiliency, and then a term we call operating mode. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Transitioning to talk about hardware, this is specific to radio design principles, and a key one up front, and it said first, is simplicity. We heard some of our senior leaders discuss, we want simplicity at the BCT and below level at that forward edge, and we're looking to deliver simplicity as it pertains to, again, digital fires, PLI, and assured voice. Along with simplicity, we want survivability, we want protection, scalability, flexibility, adaptability, and it being manageable and interoperable. How do we get there? Taking some words from General Stanton's brief this morning, he was talking about the PhD level, the practitioner level, and then delivering to that MOS agnostic user the capability, thus implying simplicity that they just receive it, interface with it, and those operational modes deliver that critical needed capability at the user level. So that's the approach we're looking to take. The last thing I'll speak on is the modernization strategy. So from an immediate term perspective, we're talking crypto modernization, the modernization of our SINGARS waveform, HF, single channel TACSAT, and then, again, stealing from our Army senior leaders, the .mil PFP integration of those capabilities in the immediate term. For the short term, for the near term, we talk about HMS Manpack leader radio, and the fielding of that, along with the CNR, or Combat Net radio fielding, think replacement of the RT 1523, and then the fielding of HF. The constant theme with the immediate term and the near term is, again, we have to integrate across doctrine, organization, training, the big M and the little m, as was referenced earlier, leader development, personnel, and facilities. And if we can deliver those capabilities to the MOS agnostic individual, that user, then we've significantly increased the simplicity regardless of the person or persons that are operating the end user device. And lastly, long-term modernization strategy. So I know it was referenced at least once or twice, but we talked about standardization. So our long-term strategy is falling in line with the MOSA architecture, modular open system architecture, and the C5ISR modular open form factor solution. So we would like to converge those assured voice capabilities, APNT, assured position navigation and timing capability, along with multiple waveforms into a chassis of sorts with a modular open system architecture, so that we can then leverage the software and quickly modernize where we need to again deliver that assured voice, position, location information, and digital fires. With that being said, I'll pass it off to Mr. John Long, and then I'll take any questions at the end.
All right, thanks, Major Williams. John Long, as the introduction said, ACM Networks and Services. So our brother network ACM has tactical radios, and below we're essentially your high throughput capabilities above that transport, compute, and store. So together we're ACM Network. Looking at the chart, so if you look up in that upper right-hand column, you'll see some things called out: data-centric, cloud-first, advanced waveforms, unified network operations. I'm going to foot stomp that a few times. increased survivability, smart routing, and assured PNT. Major Williams hit on a few of those. Hopefully I hit on the rest of them. If not, call me to task and then I'll make up something to talk about. No. If you heard me talk at the TIM, this is really not that much different, so I apologize, but hopefully I'm a little bit more polished in my delivery today. But as we look at what Major Williams talked about, the command post in the future, focusing on mobility and survivability, we got a couple of key things we got to look at. So one is working with ACM Mission Command Post out of Mission Command COE, Mission Command CDID with the CPI-2 and for the MASS CP S&T program. We got to focus on two things. One is the command post box. That can be an expando van, that can be a container, but where the staff is performing those warfighting functions, and then the mobile command group. Where's the commander and probably some key staff officers that are helping move the commander forward to be able to influence the fight where necessary. So two similar capabilities, a little bit different, but as we look at what is the transport and compute and store architecture within them, we believe there are a lot of similarities. So from a requirements perspective, what we see going forward for line of sight on the move. So on the move, line of sight, so if it works on the move, it should work at the halt. And then a little different, a departure from when we used to talk about high capacity line of sight, it was a lot of times CP to CP, distance is about 40 clicks, you turn it on, you broadcast, it's not a problem because we were in a coin fight and we didn't have to worry about being seen. As we look at this dispersed command post where I have multiple CP boxes, CP nodes that are dispersed, we also need an intranodal line of sight. Could that be the same as the internodal line of sight? Potentially, but it's going to need to have different characteristics. So depending on the phase in the operation, and I'm going to talk simplistically, not super tactical, but if the word goes out, hey, we believe the enemy's starting to see where we are, hit the tree line and disperse, we don't want to initiate the enemy targeting cycle. So the commander may say, hey, just let's turn on those intranodal comms. Let staff do what they need to do to develop the products to support the commander in that decision making, but we're not going to be blasting for everybody to see. Now, there still is a requirement, depending on where I am in the phase of the operation, where I do need to talk to my left and right, and potentially north and south. And then we could go with an internodal line of sight that's higher capacity, probably has more of a signature, just given the physics of being able to transmit that far. But those line of sight should all have a few common things, like they should be steerable. I should have steerable antennas to make sure that the link is only where the link needs to be. Power adaptability, so I'm only using as much power as I have to be. Again, trying to keep that signature as reduced as possible. From a SATCOM perspective, also on that CP mode and mobile command group, on the move SATCOM, it works on the move, it works at the halt. But multi-orbit and maximum waveform flexibility. So both of these products, when I talk about the tactical edge node, the small amount of compute and store, or smaller that we believe we going forward, need to be detachable. So depending on if I need to dismount my CP box from a mobile command group, I can detach those capabilities and set them up in an alternate location. Where we can, and understanding there can be problems with radios washing out radios, transmission capabilities integrated into the same form factor to the maximum extent possible. So when I talked about the CP box, I've got staff in there, they're performing staff functions. I've got an on-the-move LOS antenna, I've got an on-the-move satellite antenna, I've probably got some kind of compute and store for a tactical edge node as well as the workstation. There's not a lot of space. So the smallest swap possible while still providing those capabilities is of paramount importance. So and I said I'd foot stomp unified network operations. So if you're bringing a capability that's going to provide the on-the-move SATCOM, the on-the-move LOS, anything along those lines, it has to be planned, managed, controlled, defended by UNO. So, and we're also, UNO will provide that capability, or will provide that interface to do some of the things I talked about where I am in the phase of the operation. If it's hit the tree line, go low profile, we're only talking internodal, or hey, I think we can get on a 5G tower and tunnel through, and that keeps my signature low, I'm in the noise. So your capability needs to be managed by UNO, because the commander to the S6 needs to say, hey, implement this, I don't know if we want to call it emissions control, but this transmission profile to keep us out of the enemy targeting cycle. So to walk the dog a little more on what we're looking for with unified network operations, and I see this as kind of a top to bottom, we want to see intent-based networking. So you heard General Stanton talk this morning about abstracting complexity. Certainly at the brigade and probably at division in the fight, we don't have a lot of time to do things like a lot of network configuration. I think the technology is to a point where we don't need to. So I should be able to go within UNO into my intent-based networking capability. I've got to drop down some kind of simplified GUI, put in what policies I want. Intent-based networking pushes that down. I've got my software-defined wide area networking that's optimizing that network below that. IBM talked to it, so it executed. And down at the bottom of that, we can call it bandwidth virtualization, but there's a capability that's looking at, I have multiple transmission paths available. Either one went away, so I need to move to another one, and that's seamless, that's not man in the middle, it just performs it. Or I have multiple transmission paths, and it's making that determination. I can use these to move data more efficiently. Basically, if I have multiple transmission paths that can be on in that phase of the operation, it's maximizing that bandwidth that's available to move that data. And then on that chart, you'll see periodically in the things, the tactical edge node. And the question came up this morning, are we going to completely get rid of our tactical servers and just go all cloud? Do not believe that is the way forward. Understand we've got to keep some compute and store down at echelon for those essential functions that the staff needs to be able to continue to operate even when I'm in a DDIL environment, even with my multiple forms of transport, or I don't want to tip off where I am, so I'm minimizing my communications. The staff can continue to operate, utilizing the cloud when possible. So there's a lot of goodness that can come with cloud. Depending on where I'm in the fight, I'm not always going to have it, but our network is designed in a way that I can reach back for optimization when required. I already touched on dismountable components, so I've got my on-the-move antenna, I've got my on-the-move LOS, I've got my tactical edge node. I need to dismount out of the CP or the mobile command group. I can dismount those capabilities. I can take them to alternate location, piece them back together. Boom, I'm up and running. I'm still performing my functions. And just once again, integrated with unified NetOps. All these components are planned, managed, configured by unified network operations. So do not want capabilities coming in with their specific NetOps, boutique kind of NetOps tools that needs to be integrated with UNO. And I touched on small swap available, and then for all components, and we'll just foot stomp, Major Williams brought it up and it was brought up this morning, intuitiveness and learnability. The talking point here, I talked about the CP box. I have my smallest swap possible transmission components on it. The S3 doesn't need to know how to jump on a command line interface and start configuring things. Turns it on, it's working. The G6, S6 is controlling what they need to, starting with that intent-based networking, utilizing a software-defined wide area networking with bandwidth virtualization. If parts go bad, a potential strategy is to hot swap. That's going to be a material developer decision. That's how we see really supporting this command post concept of the future. So one of the things that, and I'm going to flip to my note from this morning to make sure I'm saying it. General Morrison had the four, I guess we can call them tenets of the unified network, and one of them was unified requirements. So what I talked about today touched on really three of, and if you've seen the presentation before I give, and it's got the four documents down the middle, we call them the four documents of the unified network, but unified network operations, common transport layer, which we're currently starting to write. So that has a lot of, that will have all the transport components I discussed. Common services infrastructure, that's going to be that tactical edge node all the way up through my enterprise compute and store capabilities. And then the one that we did not talk about today, but when you've got data or data-centric is the common operating environment. So that's ACM Mission Command Command Post at Mission Command COE that controls that document. But from a requirement strategy, and as one of the 4 tenets of the unified network, that's our unified network requirement strategy. If I'd known what General Morrison was briefing, I would have popped in that chart that I'm talking about, but hindsight's 2020, we can't provide it. It's been briefed before. So in sum, that's where we see as we modernize and transform, taking the network from, Major Williams talked about, we're no longer in a talk doing coin operations and I pull up in a truck with my routers and switches and a big satellite dish hanging off the back. I'm now focusing on supporting those actual command post nodes, allowing them to disperse and allowing the Army to fight and win. So with that said, that concludes my remarks and we are open for questions. Yes.
I got 2 questions. So first, up right here, you referenced the intent-based networking. Can you tell me how the Army is approaching getting over the challenge of the LDIF, and that every single device that a unit brings to the field has got to be on an LDIF for IPs that ties to task organization and all that? What confuses me is when you start talking about intent-based networking, but no one's talking about the devices that are going on the network and how that is managed relative to today, because today to do a warfighter, it still takes 6, 8, 10 weeks to build the LDIF out and put all those things on the network. Second question, part 2 for the major, is you talked a lot about radios. Can you tell us anything about the spectrum challenges with regard to the new radios, not only in CONUS, but OCONUS, and the restrictions and challenges that you're having with that, and how are you going to overcome those? For instance, example, HMS Manpack fielded to Italy. Brigade needs 32 frequencies. Italy has 1 frequency they can provide because everything else is consumed in the commercial side. How are we getting around that globally? So those are 2-part questions. Thanks.
All right. I'll start with the LDIF. Great question. Major Williams. No. So as we look at going forward with intent-based networking, because you kind of hit on, the LDIF is the underlying thing that I load into there that has destination source IPs and tunnels and role names and all that. Don't have an answer for you right now. As we work through this, that's going to be a key component. I don't know that the way we do it today is the way we're going to do it in the future. So as we're developing this requirement, as the PM's working to actually implement it, that's going to be a key question that we're going to have to answer. And I know it's not a satisfying answer. It's we don't know yet.
All right, so for the second part, as far as spectrum challenges, my answer is probably not going to be that satisfying either. But we do understand those challenges exist, especially coming from the Army Service Component Command level, GCC level. And all I can offer to you is that Army senior leaders are giving us guidance on how to, like I said, deliver that Army of 2030 signal capability. And part of that is us doing further analysis and closing that gap as we roll out or identify the need for newer waveforms and to ensure that those waveforms are delivered on time. So we do have, I can honestly say we do have guidance and working groups and those things in motion right now that are doing the in-depth analysis of ensuring, again, we can deliver sure voice, PLI, and digital fires, regardless of the environment, regardless of the jamming, direction finding, and with the waveforms that we have now. Hopefully that partially answered your question. If not, feel free to come on down and engage myself and my team at the end.
Jeff Wilson, Mission Command seated Concept Requirements Division. Earlier this morning, General Morrison had mentioned that, hey, the Brigade 6 is not alone in defense, and you've got the Cyber Protection Brigade handling that. And it sort of seemed like way back here in the blue space, safe space, are we still referring to cyber protection teams that are dispersed out to those 4 units. How do you envision that playing out? And has the Cyber Protection Brigade drastically reduced the requirement on the 6 to provide that defense?
And I cannot give you an answer. So I'm aware of the Cyber Protection Brigade, cyber protection teams, but I'm not qualified to really speak to that construct that General Morrison talked about this morning. Yes.
Can you just go into a little more detail regarding the 4? You said there was unified requirements, and a little more detail, for example, common services infrastructure, exactly what that means or what your vision for that is in the future?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Can you just, going back to the unified requirements, a little more detail on some of those, maybe in particular the common services infrastructure, exactly, what you vision that to look like in the future?
Right, so what we envision common services infrastructure to look like in the future is essentially your compute and store from, I don't want to use the word enterprise, from Army data center down to what I might have at the battalion. And when we talk about tactical edge node, that smallest, most capable compute and store that provides the warfighting staff what they need. But a departure from bringing 10 stacks of servers is, and I'm being a little over dramatic, but it's the one requirements document that'll look at compute and store requirements from the Army data center down to the lowest tactical unit.
Thank you. And what was, you had mentioned the last one was, you talked about operations, commons, transport layer, common services infrastructure. What was the final one?
So there's unified network operations, and if you have, I kept saying you got to be integrated with UNO, and that's PM, I2S, PDM, Tactical Cyber Network Operations, that is the PM that's delivering that capability. That's the top. Then Common Operating Environment, and right now that's ACM Mission Command Command Post that Mission Command CDID. They're the main authors of that document with support from the other centers. Third, we just talked about the Common Services Infrastructure. And then the 4th is the Common Transport Layer. And a lot of what I talked about today was Common Transport Layer, on the move SATCOM, on the move LOS, that good stuff.
I think we had a question over here on the right-hand side. I guess not.
Don't know if there's a question behind, but just a quick question. In your intro, talked a little about mobile command groups and some of the capability gaps assigned that are seen in those mobile command groups. How you have it delineated on here and what we're currently seeing in the future fight as we're moving towards 2030 is a requirement for mobile command groups at the enabling brigade level as well as at the division and corps level. Can you talk a little bit about the work on both the tactical radio side and network services to identify and what those mobile command groups may look like, or what the requirements you're seeing from the ACM side for enhanced mobile command groups based on getting away from fixed CPs for survivability reasons? Thank you.
So really and I'm not, it's going to sound like I'm trying to punt this question, I'm not. So the mobile command group, we're really guided, nested with ACM Mission Command Command Post, the command post side of that ACM, as they're delivering these things, as well as working with the maneuver center for that brigade below look. So basically, we know depending on where, well, it's going to be in all formations, it's going to have to be platform appropriate. So some of these things we're talking on the move SATCOM, on the move LOS, and it may need to be integrated with an AMV, with the JLTV, with the Striker. So we really take the lead from ACM Mission Command Command Post on what that construct of the command post is. We provide the network and the compute and store to facilitate what's going on within those. But I have to defer that one to ACM Mission Command Command Post on what they see as the emerging construct for that.
And for ACOM-TR, we ultimately take the same position as NNS. We follow the lead, and then we ensure that we integrate with them as they identify those requirements. But I cannot speak specifically to a requirement that we're tracking that gets after your question.
All right, just want to make sure there aren't any other additional questions out there. Okay, if not, I just wanted to thank Major Williams and Mr. Long for joining us today and sharing your insights. Again, in lieu of any kind of gift to a speaker, IFCO will make a donation to the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society on your behalf. This does conclude the sessions over here at the Georgia Cyber Center today. However, we'll be back here tomorrow at 10:15 with a couple of presentations from PEO C3T, followed by a couple of presentations from PEO IEWNS. So, welcome to join us back over at the Marriott, serving lunch over at the Reynolds Street area. Oglethorpe Ballroom, we'll have a keynote with Mr. Young Bang starting at 12:30. And we'll wrap up over there with a joint PEO panel at 3 o'clock. So thank you.
Yes, sir. It's Bobby. Yeah.